Today we are going to talk about the antebellum period of the United States. The word antebellum means before the war, which in this case is the American Civil War. The antebellum period involves three really key concepts. One, we see a rise in abolitionist movements during this time, as well as the first women's rights movements. Two, the Industrial Revolution. And three, the Second Great Awakening. The period was also heavily influenced by Southern pride and aristocracy. During the antebellum period, we began to see increasingly heated debates over slavery. These arguments were largely sparked by the acquisition of new states in the U.S., as well as important court cases such as the Dred Scott decision. Women's rights also saw a rise during the antebellum period. We had conventions like Seneca Falls and the Women's Rights Conventions in Salem, Ohio. These conventions would lead to a more open discussion about women's rights in the U.S. We also saw a massive rise in the arguments over slavery versus free states in the U.S. with the acquisition of Missouri in 1820. Those arguing for the side of slavery wanted Missouri to be a slave state, and those wanting abolition argued for Missouri to be a free state. This debate would eventually lead to the Missouri Compromise, which would make Missouri a slave state, Maine a free state, and say that all other future states north of the 3630 parallel was a free state, excluding Missouri, and all states south of that would be slave states. However, since people can never follow the compromises they set in place, we still saw debates over slave versus free states later on, and in 1850 we saw Henry Clay create a compromise, aptly called the Compromise of 1850, in order to help ease these tensions. This created the Bloodhound Bill and pushed the Civil War off for a little bit longer. But, yet again, we just completely overwrite our own compromises, and we get the Kansas-Nebraska Act shortly after the Compromise of 1850, which throws everything into chaos again. This act said that Kansas would be given the right to popular sovereignty, the ability to choose whether or not it would be a slave or a free state, which was a horrible idea because it flung Kansas into its own civil war called Bleeding Kansas, which was one of the major precursors to the Civil War. The Industrial Revolution. During this time, we also saw the Industrial Revolution. People were learning how cool machines are and how much labor they can save. We saw things like the Lowell textile mills, railroads, steamboats, the cotton gin, which caused a rise in slavery in the South, interchangeable parts, and water mills. All of these things were super key to the industry in both the North and South. However, the North had a much larger industrial sector than the South, which was also very important in the North's fight during the Civil War. Southern aristocracy. Because the South had seen a huge boom in its economy due to everyone selling tons of cotton, we began to see a rise in Southern aristocracy. Mansions would be built to accompany their massive plantations of cotton, and there was grand displays of wealth. The South was viewed, mostly by themselves, as being a place of upper-class wealth and behavior. The Southern rich plantation owners also believed themselves to be quite sophisticated, and much better than the Yankees to the north. The Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was a time period a lot like the First Great Awakening. We saw a massive rise in religion, and a shift from the church being your only method of worship to being a direct connection with the deity, predominantly Protestant, of your choice. Baptists and Methodists saw a huge growth in membership, and multiple offshoots of Christianity have their origins in the Second Great Awakening, including Mormons and Shakers. One key for this Second Great Awakening is burned over districts, so terms for their complete conversion of various religions with no fuel or people left to burn or convert. And that's the antebellum period of the United States.